I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents.
Pro-life advocates taking it to the streets.
It's the constant presence and prayerful presence outside these places, relentlessly, endlessly.
Federal guidelines on embryo research may be a tough sell.
You are making use of fellow human beings at the very earliest stage of their existence.
A race where everyone who competes is a winner.
Good evening. Francesca Maxime is off tonight. Well, we've been hearing a lot about abortion lately. It's been at the forefront of the recent healthcare debate. Cardinal Justin Regali, who heads pro-life efforts for the U.S. Bishops' Conference, is one of the latest to weigh in. Regali sent a letter to Congress asking lawmakers to support healthcare reform that respects human life from conception to natural death. There are others, though, who are bypassing political avenues, and they're taking their pro-life messages to the streets. That includes the Helpers of God's Precious Infants. The group holds vigils outside abortion clinics in New York City, and our cameras recently got a first-hand look.
So we're not going simply to save babies' lives, physical lives. We want to, of course. We're going there to change hearts, to change souls. And we can't do that. Christ, God can do it, but He can do it through us and with us. He needs us. He needs our permission to do so. My name is Monsignor Philip Riley. I'm a priest for 49 years. And this morning we had a Helpers of God's Precious Infants prayer vigil at Queen of Martyrs Church. We had the Mass, and following the Mass we had Adoration of Blessed Sacrament, exposition, and then we went in a rosary type procession, escorted by the New York City Police Department, to All Women's Medical Pavilion, which is an abortion clinic. And at that site we prayed 20 decades of the Rosary, and then returned to the church for closing benediction. So we started from a parish of Queen of Angels in Regal Park. It was the first prayer vigil. We went to Choices. We had 1,000 people came on the first prayer vigil. And the media was there, and it was something different. In other words, it was totally legal, totally acceptable. The police actually accompanied us as they did today, you see. And it was the beginning, because from then we would then go the following month to another abortion clinic with a prayer vigil, and we'd leave a group behind at the place where we were the previous month. And so eventually we started to do vigils throughout the diocese and setting up groups of people to pray and counsel at the places where we had gone. But we are succeeding, because in 2006 and 7, the statistics just came in, which is mind-boggling. The amount of babies that were born in the United States was the greatest amount of babies born in 1 year in the history of the United States, even more than in the baby boomers' years. The amount of young people who kept their children was the greatest amount that they have recorded. Now, that tells you something. And then I said the Gallup poll that was just taken and released this past week shows the majority of the Americans are now pro-life as opposed to pro-choice. That includes both men and women. So that the impact of God's people being present at these sites is incredibly important from the point of view of it is what Jesus wants. We are doing the work of Christ. He's doing it through us, with us, and in us. And the people are really becoming Christians because you're loving your enemies. And it's that constant drop of water which puts the hole in the rock rather than the big splash. It's the constant presence and prayerful presence outside these places, relentlessly, endlessly, until we win. And the God's people are doing it, and that's a tremendous blessing to the world.
Now, Helpers of God's Precious Infants will hold their next Mass and Vigil on Saturday, August 29th at Our Lady of the Cenacle Church in Richmond Hill. We posted some more information about that on our website as well. Just head on over to netny.net/currents and click on Riding the Wave. Well, stay tuned. We have much more currents coming up straight ahead. Later, disabled runners without an Achilles heel. But first, a vocation crisis you may not be aware of.
And a couple of Brooklyn men search for the meaning of life.
They had a motivation and a drive to live, even though they didn't have the fancy car or fancy home.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later on in the show, potential cures or deadly experiments. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. A vocation crisis of a different sort. That's what New York Archbishop Timothy Dolan says about the number of Catholics getting married. Speaking with the Catholic News Agency, Dolan pointed out that only 50% of young Catholics are getting married. He says it's an issue the church needs to address. The end of an era in Cincinnati. Archbishop Daniel Pilarczyk, who had been the longest-serving head of an American diocese, is retiring. Pilarczyk reached the mandatory retirement age of 75. He has been the leader of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati since 1982. Now, there's no word yet on a replacement. A Vatican official says being a Christian in Iraq could soon become a thing of the past. Archbishop Fernando Filoni, who was previously the Vatican's representative to Iraq, says Christians live in constant fear of violence there. He says the Iraqi government needs to act to give Christians some hope. Well, here's a sign that things may be improving. It took almost 40 years, but the Iraqi government has returned 3 confiscated schools to the Catholic Church. Speaking with the Vatican's newspapers, the patriarch of the church in Iraq expressed gratitude to Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, calling it a truly important step. Immoral, that is what Italian bishops are saying about a record lottery jackpot there. Italians are rushing to buy tickets in hopes of winning the $186 million jackpot. The head of the Italian Bishops' Conference says the situation has turned into a form of idol worship. And he says that previous jackpot winners have actually ended up worse off after winning. Well, there is more to life than material possessions. As we hear from Rome Reports, that's what some Brooklyn men discovered when they visited the furthest reaches of the world.
It's not often that a film claims to discover the meaning of life. But that's what this producer says his film intends to do.
The film really answers the questions that most people ask themselves. What is life all about? Where am I going? Is it all worth it in the end?
It's about us two guys going to certain areas in the world, Africa, South America, and in our own backyard in New York City.
Jeffrey Asize is the protagonist in this documentary that takes place in New York, Peru, and Kenya. Along with his brother Cliff, the 2 Brooklyn boys try to discover the human element behind the meaning of life, diving firsthand into the lives of locals, living homeless in New York City, visiting AIDS patients and lepers in Africa, and handicapped children in Peru.
They were facing death every day, yet these people were very faith-filled people. They had a motivation and a drive to live, even though they didn't have the fancy car or fancy home, or even though they didn't have 10 fingers or 2 legs. They still had a great motivation and desire to live life to the fullest.
One of the things that we said in the very beginning when we started filming this is that no matter what happens, don't shut off the cameras. So what you'll see when you see this film is basically what happened really behind the scenes for most of the time.
Joseph and Jeffrey were in Rome for a screening of the film. Afterward, the audience had the opportunity to ask Jeff about how making the film changed his life. He says he hopes the documentary leaves people with a deeper sense of human camaraderie.
They take the film and don't leave it in their chairs, but they actually maybe go home and apply this film to their lives, maybe forgive someone that hurt them or came across them in a negative way.
The Human Experience has garnered 18 film festival honors both in the United States and in other countries, including Best Humanitarian Film and Best Feature Film.
Well, The Human Experience is currently playing in Europe, but you can host a screening of the film where you live. I've actually posted some more information about that on our blog. Head over to netny.net/currents. Go to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen and click on Riding the Wave. Stay tuned, there's much more Currents straight ahead.
Coming up, does embryo research have unlimited possibilities? He thinks otherwise.
This is purely a speculative proposal at the moment because this has never actually been done.
Last month, the federal government released new guidelines on stem cell research, which critics say encourage the destruction of embryos, including those that would otherwise survive and be born. But advocates for that research argue it holds unlimited possibilities. Well, one man who has plenty to say on the topic is Father Tadeusz Pacholczyk of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. He sat down recently with our Francesca Maxime.
We're talking today about embryonic stem cell research and what the Church's position on that. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
So first of all, for those who may not know, explain what exactly embryonic stem cell research is.
Well, this is the proposal to use cells that are derived out of living human embryos. And the embryos must be destroyed in order to acquire these cells. Once you do that, once you destroy the embryo and get the cells, they're called a cell line.
Okay.
So the root problem here, if you look at it from the vantage point of the moral question, is that you are making use of fellow human beings at the very earliest stage of their existence in this exploitative fashion.
Right. And of course, the whole reasoning behind it is for scientific research in order to aid the health of other human beings. I mean, that's the argument.
That's the argument. The proposal is that at some point in the future, these cells might be able to be used for transplantation. Now, this is purely a speculative proposal at the moment because this has never actually been done in any humans, and even the animal models that currently exist are rather, you might say, tentative. The results are unconvincing in many of the attempts.
Sure. Okay, so now that we've gotten that part out of the way, the idea of the Church obviously being morally opposed to this is quite clear.
Yes, it is. I mean, it is a recognition that all members of the human family, whether old, whether young, whether in the womb or out of the womb, all of us deserve unconditional protection. And even it goes a little further. You might say the Church recognizes the vulnerability of the youngest members. So we make special provisions to care for children. We protect them in a special way because they can't protect themselves. And when you're talking about embryonic humans, these are the most vulnerable of all and the earliest time point that is under discussion.
Sure. Well, this is definitely a hot topic, and now one that's gotten back into the public forum again with the government and some recent changes that have been made. Tell us a little bit about what the federal changes mean now.
What has happened is the Obama administration has revised the government's stance because under President Bush, there was a very limited number of stem cell lines that were eligible for federal money. What has happened with the new regulations is that it is now possible to get federal money for more lines and for lines that will be prepared in the future, not just for ones that exist currently. And the rules have basically come out and tried to specify some ethical boundaries. So for example, when parents have embryos that are left over from fertility treatments, they can sign the dotted line, fill out informed consent forms, and donate their own children for research and for destructive research. And this, the protocols for this have basically been worked out in these new regulations. Now, this is kind of a farce. This is kind of a fiction at the end of the day, because I often say to people, this is something like saying, let's not look at the central ethical violation. This is like saying, it's okay to go and rob banks, but whenever you do it, just be sure you sweep up the glass that you broke as you entered the bank. Be sure that you don't harm any of the guards when you tie them up. But stealing the money, oh well, we're not going to talk too much about that. Destroying the embryo, we're not going to talk too much about that. We're going to pretend that that's ethical. and then go on and build up all these other sorts of ethical regulations to surround it.
Would there be less of an issue perhaps if they were only talking about old lines or pre-harvested embryonic stem cells, or do you think that, I mean, that really the thing that's sticking out here now is that it, you know, will apply to the future?
Well, I think there would be less of an issue if the regulations were fashioned similar to the way that they had been under the Bush administration, because there you had a clear cutoff, and it wasn't possible to use federal funds for future stem cell lines. So the problem here now is that the federal government is becoming complicit in the destruction of human beings in the future. Now, it's true that you cannot use federal money directly to destroy the embryo, but once that dastardly deed has been carried out by the scientist using private money, then the cells that are available will be eligible for federal funds. So, you know, federal funding is a huge incentive to researchers.
Absolutely, yeah. Scientists are motivated by that.
Absolutely.
It gives them, you know, money to do their laboratory work, even in this instance. Tell me a little bit about then what the church will do going forward, given this particular announcement and these changes.
Well, Cardinal Regali responded to these new regulations that were released from the Obama administration, and he strongly recommended that faithful Catholics contact their lawmakers and express their displeasure over this, their concern over these widening of the regulations, because this is a lessening of the protections that should exist towards early and nascent human life. So this is the first thing we have to do, is be engaged in the process of assuring that our legal system protects the most vulnerable among us.
All right. Well, Father Tad, thank you so much for being here. We'll certainly look at this in the future and going forward, and we very much appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Francesca. Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Father Tadeusz Pacholczyk of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Well, stay tuned. We have much more currents straight ahead.
Coming up, these athletes aren't taking their freedom for granted.
Because you're not focusing on your own weakness, you're uplifting someone else for their strengths.
Welcome back. According to the last census, 1 in 5 Americans, that's nearly 50 million men, women, and children, have some form of disability. But increasingly, we're being reminded that physical limitations are in the eye and the mind of the beholder. Well, you're about to meet one woman who is helping those with disabilities realize their abilities and giving all of us something to cheer about and a cause to cheer on. It is Tuesday, and Mary Bryant is in Central Park for another day of warm-ups with her running club. But it's unlike any other running club in the city. All the runners are disabled. This is the Achilles Club, taking its name from the mythical Greek hero who had just one weakness, his heel. But the members of the Achilles Club find in these gatherings not weakness, but strength.
When you're out there and you're doing something for someone else, you become stronger, you become more empowered, because you're not focusing on your own weakness, you're uplifting someone else for their strengths, and that strengthens you.
Mary has run her own surprising race through life. She grew up in Cleveland and came to New York 15 years ago to be a Ford model. She started running to keep her trim figure after battles with bulimia and anorexia. Soon, she felt called to fight another battle for her older brother, Don.
God immediately just put this in my mind. Wait a minute, Don can't run. Don can't even walk out the door.
Don was a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down after an accident that snapped his spinal cord. He was confined to a wheelchair at home in Ohio.
I have 2 legs, and that day I called him and I said, I'm going to do this for you, and I'm going to do it for me, because I can.
Her plan was to run in the next New York City Marathon and to run for Don.
And it was in 1994 that I did my first marathon. I had his picture on my shirt, "Go Mary, do it for Don," and I made 2 of them, and I sent one to him in Cleveland I would tell him what it was like to do these marathons and the people cheering, and I said, it would be so cool if you could just be out there with me. He's like, oh yeah.
But running for him wasn't enough. Mary wanted to run with him. In 1997, the two of them completed the marathon together, with Don using a special chair that he controlled by moving his head.
He was the first man without use of his arms or legs to do the marathon on his own strength. Imagine 25 years of having other people feed you, bathe you, dress you, brush your teeth, and sit you in a chair. And finally, he got to go out and do something on his own.
After that race, Mary is now a dedicated marathoner, training up to 45 miles a week. She developed a program coaching people with severe disabilities in wheelchairs called Don's Team. Mary is now vice president of Achilles International. The team competes in marathons nationwide, most recently at the Hope and Possibility 5K in Central Park last month. Her goals are to inspire and build confidence for the men and women who are disabled. And as much as she is guided by her own experience and determination, she's also driven by something deeper, her faith.
I honestly believe God is in my heart, Jesus is in my life, and Mary has been more than a role model. Knowing that I was named after the Virgin Mary, I've often caught myself in prayer to her, saying, you know, please let me be respectful to you and do the best I can. But make time for prayer. Because as long as we can stay focused and our foundation is straight and we're on the right path, everything will fall in place.
Mary Bryant and the Achilles Track Club, just a very inspiring story. You know, she mentioned running in the New York City Marathon. Well, that race happens every year in November, and it's really the next big race that's coming up this year. Well, that is it for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, it's an institution in the Brooklyn Diocese, the diocesan newspaper, The Tablet. And our own Lino Rulli will pay it a visit. It should be interesting. That and more coming up tomorrow here on Currents. Remember, you can always watch us online. Head on over to netny.net/currents. There you can also see clips of the show and meet the people who make it all happen. While you're there, let us know what you think of the show as well. Email us by sending us an email at dropusaline@currentsny.net. That address, once again, drop us a line, all one word, at currentsny.net. Well, for all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thank you so much for watching and have a great night.